Welcome to the Future Humans podcast with Jean Houston and Anneloes Smitsman, the co-authors of the Future Humans trilogy.
Dr. Mariana Bozesan, thank you so much for joining us. We are really, really honored to have this conversation with you, and more importantly, to have this exploration with you, especially for us in the writing of the second book of our Future Humans trilogy. And we feel there are many insights and experiences also that you've had that are incredibly insightful for our readers and for our listeners. And for those of you who don't know yet who this amazing woman is, let me share just a little bit about her. And I do really encourage you all to read up on her website as well, and also her incredible books and all of her amazing work. And you'll understand then, because of the second book of the Future Human trilogies, we're also diving into the heart of economics. We're diving also into the heart of the financial system, and really what is underneath that, what's the consciousness underneath that, and has created these systems that many of us are now feeling are very harmful to our relationships and our world, but of course also with the intention to explore how else and in what other way can we co-create these systems. And this is where Mariana, we believe, really plays a key role also within the world. It's an incredible, impressive track record as an award-winning integral investor and a successful serial entrepreneur, leveraging exponentially growing technologies to accelerate the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals within the planetary boundaries by 2030. And that's really quite a call, especially out of everything that's going on right now in the world, as many of you know. And she's also a renowned author of many books and reports and publications, including those for the Club of Rome and the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. I've been following her podcasts, which are also incredibly informative and insightful and engaging. So I really recommend everyone to check out her amazing work. So Mariana, thank you once again for being with us. And Jean, would you be able to ask the first question that we're going to be exploring with Mariana?
Well, first I must say that I am just on tenterhooks to find out what you're going to say, Mariana, because I think of you as a Renaissance person, rinascita, rebirthing the world into a new kind of time. And just as the great 15th century Renaissance in Europe was preceded by a terrible pandemic, a terrible plague, we seem to find ourselves in the same place. But it was followed by this rebirth of spirit, of ideas, of the varieties of all manners of both thinking and doing. And I see you as a classical and yet very present example of a Renaissance person, just reading some of your work. And so I dare to ask you that out of the breadth and depth of your thinking, if you could actually do a very Renaissance thing, and that is design the economic and financial systems of a possible world, as happened also in the 15th century Renaissance. This would be a world that really can work, and that can work for everyone. What would be its most important qualities?
Well, first of all, thank you so much to both of you for having me on your program. I am deeply honored and humbled to be here. So thank you. I couldn't have dreamt that one day Jean Houston would interview me, but so thank you. And thank you, Anneloes, for making this all possible, because it takes one to see one. So the fact that that we're having this conversation speaks for the reality that we are able to see each other. And not only that, but join forces into trying, at least, to find some solutions to the grand global challenges. So in terms of trying to answer your question, I think that's there are no easy answers, and I can only come to an answer from my own little perspective as being a woman and an entrepreneur and an investor, and having studied computer science and artificial intelligence at the time when most people didn't even know what computer science was. They all thought that was it had something to do with journalism because because it's called Informatik in German, and they all thought it is journalism. So, and I discovered early on in my, at the end of 1979, I started studying computer science. That artificial intelligence was much, much more interesting because it built the bridge in using technology in an intelligent way to really address problems, real world problems that that humanity has. And I had learned in school about the limits to growth, the book that was written in 74 by the Club of Rome, or the report to the Club of Rome, and I knew, wow, artificial intelligence has the opportunity, can help bring technological solutions to the grand global challenges. So fast forward into today's date, like 50 years later, I think one of the most important things that we have lost as we are being overwhelmed by grand global challenges is hope. And the abundance that nature is providing us. And so our fear have taken over, and scarcity thinking, which is an amazing lie, as my dear friend Lynn Twist says, has taken over our emotions, our thinking, everything that we do. And so that leads to a type of culture that we have implemented over the past decades that is based on scarcity thinking and greed. So we believe that by accumulating more things, be it money, being possessions, being whatever, a wife, a husband, a house, a boat, whatever it is, we have succumbed to the lie that will give us the security that our hearts are actually seeking. And so if you're asking me what I would do and what are the acupuncture points in addressing the grand global challenges, from my perspective, first of all, that would start with the mind shift, with working on ourselves individually, that's where it starts, and opening our hearts to see the abundance that nature has provided us ever since civilization, human civilization started. And I think if we open up to this extraordinary opportunity that we currently have, and which is clearly visible in the technological realizations and achievements that we have, then I think that then we would begin to trust that we together can provide and come up with the solutions that we need right now. Because fear is a good slave, but a terrible teacher. And so that would be a long answer to a short question. Mind shift, work on ourselves to achieve, to begin to build a road, a bridge between the head and the heart. And so that's the longest way, actually, that humanity and each of us individually have to overcome.
Thank you. And that from the mind to the heart shift, I agree with you. I think that is just so important. And I'm actually really interested in your experience here, your personal experience. You've been working with top level businesses around the world. And so you would have encountered also resistance from people in that transformation. And yet there are many examples that you have where that shift has occurred, where you yourself, through who you are, somehow has found that sweet spot for people to help them make that mind shift and also make the heart shift. So if you were to kind of recall some of those most transformative moments that you've had with people who are really also a leading force in business, if you recall that, what would you say was really what made the shift happen?
There are so many shifts. It's not just one thing that happened. First of all, I started I, being born in and growing up in at the bottom of the pyramid. I was born and raised in Romania as the only child between a German mother and a Romanian father. And I encountered discrimination very, very, very early on. And that is due to fear again, because people in Romania could not make sense why my parents would speak Hungarian with one another in a country that is Romania, and they couldn't understand that that was the only language that both of them spoke because they took it in school. And when they fell in love, my father gave a concert. He loved to sing, and he got flowers, and then he went into after the concert to give those flowers to the most beautiful girl in the room, and that's how he met my mother, who didn't speak any Romanian, although she belonged to the German minority that had actually lived in Transylvania for 800 years. But anyway, so that's how they met, and they fell in love, and the only way how they could communicate was Hungarian. And so I grew up very early on in an environment that was hostile. Hostile not only because we didn't have anything to eat, although both my parents worked very hard, but the communist system, the way it was implemented, didn't properly work. People had the best of intentions, but the intentions alone are not enough to provide the economic environment so that people can thrive. And so that's a wonderful example of how ideas, if they're not implemented integrally, they don't work. So at age 16, when we finally, because of my mother's heritage, we were allowed to leave Romania because the Germans looked for workers. And because of our German heritage, they opened the doors, and we could come to Germany. All of a sudden, I found myself again being discriminated because I was, a refugee. I wasn't a refugee, but that's how people perceived it. And so I had again to look within and work on my personal growth to try to understand and find a place in a hostile environment. Although the German government was extremely helpful, and so they sent me to school, nothing cost, and all of a sudden life was much, much better. And as I moved ahead, began studying computer science, I was surrounded by people who were more open-minded, and so the entire thing it changed, and I ended up becoming an exchange student at Stanford University because of my interest in artificial intelligence within the computer science studies, and that again changed my life radically. Because I again met and was grateful and blessed to live in an environment of multiple cultures. Silicon Valley is just a wonderful environment to really work on issues and meet multiple cultures and be at home in the world, basically. So that transformed me again. But what really, really shifted my inner life was when, in the mid-90s, my husband and I, we were living in Silicon Valley. We saw Mosaic. We knew the internet, and for the first time, we saw the first browser that would enable the humanity to really, really get access to the internet, to the world, the wealth of information and data and knowledge. And we knew that a new era was starting. And so after a failed startup in Silicon Valley, we came to Germany wanting to bring people onto the internet, only to find out that they didn't understand. I mean, the most advanced, the telecommunications and all of these people in Germany didn't understand, didn't see what we don't see today either, the importance of exponential growth of technology. And so it took us a long time. They didn't understand, why do they need an internet presence? We are talking 1994. The head of Oracle Germany, for whom I worked at the time, said, as long as I'm at Oracle, the internet is not a topic. And of course, we now see through the pandemic that this kind of mindset really succeeded in not digitalize the world. That's why the pandemic, only had to occur in order for us to open up to this. So in terms of economics and financials, what the big shift in my case was when we realized that people didn't want to have an internet presence because they didn't know what the internet was and they didn't have access to the internet. We went to friends, fools, and family and got money to start the first internet service provider in Germany, which became the first internet stock that went public on the German stock exchange, which all of a sudden got us off poverty. It was an IPO, an exit. And then if you work so hard, like in my case, to really survive and thrive and do the best with what I had between my two ears, all of a sudden the financial means were here. And my husband and I are seminar junkies, so we've studied with who's who, going to seminars on a regular basis. But that was then the point where we saw, oh my God, we live in a schizophrenic world. On one hand, my parents, although they were workers, they were philanthropists, because that means that you love people. So they went and gave the little money that they had to those who had less in Romania and others around the world. And then all of a sudden, the IPO, Wall Street. So I saw something is really skewed and wrong. So you go during the day, make money on Wall Street, and on the other, in the evening, you give money, I'm better than you, so I'm giving you money to philanthropy, which is good, but it's a strange system that enables that. So I thought something is really wrong. And I looked for a model to integrate the two, and that's how I came across the integral theory by Ken Wilber. That, of course, changed, again, my entire life, and he has been a friend ever since and a big supporter, which, of course, helped me take the integral theory, the model, into every single aspect of our activities since then. So it's now close to over 20 years, and build companies with people who come in from a higher level of consciousness, not an egocentric, not even an ethnocentric level, but world-centric. And so it is my belief that by working with people like this and supporting, our common growth, inner growth, transformation, and creating the abundance through technology, that's the best contribution I can bring to the table. So there are many, many, many things, but this was a significant one coming across a theoretical model. And as a scientist, of course, I then went to get my PhD in psychology and transpersonal psychology, which of course provided the foundation. I could stand on two legs as a scientist, as a computer scientist, as a business person, and also in terms of psychology. So integrating the head and the heart through investing, through entrepreneurship, because it's much, much easier to start at the bottom with two people and a dog and a business plan and build companies rather than go to Volkswagen or BMW that are, that's a huge conglomerates that is very difficult. So that's my humble contribution to this.
Fascinating. You certainly have not bored God. You seem to be a universe of ideas and of learning packed into a biodegradable space-time suit. You really are on a frontier of a frontier. Now, we do know that we are in a time of whole system transformation, and you are playing a very interesting leading role in this transformation. So then if we bring it back to economics, what would you suggest is needed for making this shift from predator economics to the love and caring economy? And how do you see that inner shift first and foremost? And here's something else. Here's in terms of the inner shift. Are you organizing? I mean, obviously, you have you are a maestra of an orchestrator. how would you create places where people can hear the new music of the time, orchestrate, and begin to have the level of consciousness that transcends all of the nonsense of the last 50 and 60 years? How would you do that?
There are two major questions that I heard from your question. One is in terms of economic integration, and the other is how would the transformation occur at the individual and collective level in terms of mind shift. So let me start again with the with the head part, and then we could go into the heart part. I have studied in parallel to computer science, while I studied computer science in Karlsruhe at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. I got so bored with computer science classes and all this detached from the human being kind of teaching, that I went across the street, and I was always extremely interested in history, because history helped me make sense of the world. And I haven't stopped, particularly now as a member of the Club of Rome. We are faced with all these different, and that's the problem, segregated silos that all say, no, do this, do that, da 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 da. And we are competing, the silos are competing with one another. And this prevents transformation because we're wasting our energy. We don't join forces. We don't build, it's like having a bowl, a small bowl, a glass where you have a little fish, and then the other one has the bowl. We're not building a huge aquarium where a biotope, where everyone can live successfully. So, because we think, oh no, my bowl is more important than yours, and is better, and is blue, and is more green than yours. And so as I looked at archaeological studies, history, there is an extraordinary book by Joseph Tainter, and I'm sure you know it, The Collapse of Complex Civilizations. And he looked, it was a book that was published back in the 80s, I think. So he looked at what, in terms of archaeological remains, what made complex societies collapse. And so in summary, he identified various sectors that pertain to a complex society, which, if those cannot be sustained economically, the society collapses. And so he looked at the Sumerian, the Romans, and others. So what are these sectors? Because they're no different than we have today. They're always the same thing. It's it's a global world. But so one sector is food, another is information, how information gets acquired and processed, and transportation, how the society communicates with one another, and in terms of transport, how logistics, how do you distribute food across the empires, and so on. Then the energy needs to be provided, for everyone, because otherwise the society cannot thrive. Civilization only exists based on energy. And then various materials, Stone Age and metals and da-da-da-da-da. And so these are the ones that he identified. And I would add to that mindset, which is the unseen, which is what Ken Wilber has so beautifully brought into my life, at least. So what happens when a society collapses? All of these sectors of the society can no longer be sustained because the cost for sustaining them is so expensive that the governments cannot sustain them. So economists speak within this context about the law of diminishing returns. So you cannot sustain, the society collapses. Today, we have the same sectors, but we have something that wasn't present before, namely the law of accelerated returns that comes from investments from the collective intelligence across since eons, since civilization started, but more accelerated since the Industrial Revolution, that brings technology into our lives, makes our lives easier, more affordable, simpler, accessible, demonetization, dematerialization, democratization. We all see it costs a lot of money to build an iPhone, but to buy it, a couple of years later is cost nothing. And that's true for everything, whether you look at the energy sector. Solar panels, building them is expensive, but today you can put one on your house, and it's affordable. The same for wind energy, the same for batteries. And if you have these, for instance, to stick with the energy sector, if you see how the technology converges over time, in 10 years, if we continue with this law of accelerated returns, you get more for the money. In 10 years, we will be able to produce energy from the sun, from the wind, from nature at zero cost, with very little, higher productivity, little waste, and so on. So this is, from an economical perspective, this is what we need to look at and do more of, but sustainably. So the next 2 years, we need to not 10 years. Scientists tell us that we only have 10 years to set our systems, and I would go back to the 6 sectors that I mentioned, in order to build societies that are sustainable. So net zero emissions, and even, go beyond that. But we need to start now. So in energy, we have the solutions. In food, we have the solutions. For instance, we can, our grandchildren will look back at us and say, oh my God, how terrible you guys were. You were raising animals to slaughter them and eat them. That is it's impossible. If you go to Star Trek, you have a replicator, you can build food, based on cells, from protein. You can build food in a lab, through, fermentation, precision fermentation, and others. So we don't have to do these, and it's all affordable. For instance, for 2010, gaining or building 1 kilogram of artificial meat cost $1 million. Now it costs 10. So it is all affordable. It's possible because of the law of accelerated return. And I could go into transportation and other areas, but now to come back to the second part of your question, in terms of the mind shift. Well, that's the hard part. And the solution, because it's oh my God, I've been sitting on a cushion meditating for 40 years. I have studied with who's who in this world, including our common friend Deepak Chopra and others. That's hard. But I also believe that technology can help move us. And, I find in the book that, you sent me, you quote HeartMath, my friends at HeartMath, there is technology that is enabling us to make small shifts in our consciousness, to awaken to different understanding, and can accelerate the inner development individually, but also collectively. And when it comes to how the world can be transformed, well, it is a leadership issue. Most people are followers. They don't want to be leaders. So unfortunately, it is left to our leaders to lead us in a sustainable future. And they need to be awakened. Politicians don't get any training in science. Unfortunately, they don't get any training in, personal growth. What does it mean to be in ethics and morals? So that needs to change. And scientists, programmers don't get trained in ethics and morals. So the result are these terrible, terrible algorithms that put our society at risk and make people kill themselves. And but I'll stop here and hoping that I have answered your question here too.
You've more than answered it. You've added things to that. The law of accelerated return, that's really, really powerful. And that's also powerful from an evolutionary perspective. In the book as well, we are exploring how one of these evolutionary laws is also increasing complexity, but in a way that is evolutionary coherent rather than that it becomes more entropic. And it's have a sense that somehow what you're describing here, the two align. And I'm curious about two things. One is, while this is happening, this trend that you're describing so powerfully, we also have seen, of course, increasing ecological depth from a planetary perspective. So could it be because the technologies haven't yet caught up yet to that point? Or are we seeing kind of the backlog of the old ways because those were so much fossil fuel based? And that brings me then to the second question, and that is, I'm so curious to learn from you about safe AI and ethical algorithms. In our book, the main character Rose, she is convinced that when we understand the cosmological architecture of life itself, for a better understanding of consciousness itself, that, and because there are many algorithms that we can find in nature that are not based on greed and competition and division and disunity. In fact, they're algorithms that are based on this deeper wholeness of life itself. So she's really curious to explore how can we work with algorithms and perhaps even safe AI that is based on that understanding of the unity of consciousness itself. So those two questions, one, the kind of what do we need to understand about ecological depth that has increased so much in the same period? And the second question then, how can we make that shift towards, and what do you understand about safe AI and ethical algorithms?
I'm not sure I understand. First of all, I'd like to comment on the law of accelerated return. This is not my idea. It's Ray Kurzweil. So I would like to give credit to where credit is due. So this is extremely important. And I highly, highly recommend his writings. He's an extraordinary smart person. So in terms of the ecological depth, I'm not sure I understand what your question aims at. Can you please?
Sure. So if we're looking at the global footprint, then we start to see that the time in which we are in ecological depth every year gets sooner and sooner. So that means that we're using more of our planetary resources than that the Earth is able to regenerate. So we're creating, and also we are decreasing the value of many of the ecosystem services for future generations. So both of those aspects are taken into account when there is global footprint calculations, whereby we see that we are kind of consuming much more of our planet than our planet is able to regenerate and renew herself in an increasing trend. That, of course, within the planetary boundaries framework as well, and the thresholds, sustainability thresholds and allocations. So that's where the kind of ecological depth, where we've seen this growing trend every year, as long as our economies are so much fossil fuels dependent. And that if we're using extractive economic means for being able to growing and developing our societies and also fossil fuel based technologies. So that's that.
You have the simplest questions in the world. And I only have 40 minutes to respond to all of them and provide solutions. So thank you for your faith.
Well, I have complete faith in you.
Well, that as we are doing this interview, COP21 takes place. So they are basically trying to address exactly that. So in terms of my humble wisdom on this, yes, this is one of the most important aspects that we need to address these days, because our very livelihood is at stake. And one thing that few people are actually willing to address is overpopulation. And of course, the more people are born on this planet, the more resources we need. And of course, we only have one Earth. So something has to give in order to get out of this conundrum. Apart from the economic and industrialized, because we all need to feed these people. You know, we're almost 7.7, close to 8 billion. And I have spoken before about the exponential growth of technology. Well, the world's population has also grown exponentially over the past 100 years. And every 12 years, we add another billion to this. And here there are many, many ways to look at it. I have personally adopted the report to the Club of Rome, the action that is called upon in the report to the Club of Rome, called Transformation is Feasible, by the Stockholm Resilience Center. The head writers were Jörgen Randers, who is a member of the International Club of Rome, and one of the original authors of Limits to Growth. And another researcher is Johan Rockström, who is the head of the Potsdam Institute in Germany, also member of the Club of Rome. And so in that very short report, which I highly recommend people to read, is just a few pages, they are basically outlining what needs to happen in order for us to go back to a safe operating system within our planet, back to the safe planetary boundaries, of which there are 9. So this is very complex, convoluted. We could have an entire conversation on this. But what's actually happening is everyone wants to implement the UN SDGs. And so these are very aspirational goals, and we should. However, we cannot pick and choose the ones that we like and disregard others, because they all need to be implemented together within a safe operating system, and that's currently not happening. So what Johan Rockström is basically, and Jörgen Randers are recommending, is we need to look at how we are implementing them and go back to a safe operating system of the planet, because we have left those. What does it mean? There are 9 planetary boundaries which have been identified by science, which, when you talk about the dangers of our ecological depth, you call that, then that's exactly what we need to look at. So CO2 emissions is just one, and that's the most important one. But there are many others. The nitrogen flows have been also is extremely important. Our oceans are warming up because of that. And the correlation, warm drinking water is also an important aspect in this. So I don't have time to go into the many details of the 9 planetary boundaries. Within this context, those who are listening to this, I highly, highly recommend going and watching the Netflix movie where called Breaking Boundaries, that is been made between with Sir Attenborough and Johan Rockström, where they explain exactly what the situation is of the current 9 planetary boundaries, and how, what needs to happen in order to go back. So that's a separate conversation. In terms of implementing the UN SDGs within planetary boundaries, and we're not on the trajectory that we're currently doing. We're not doing that. We'll fail in implementing the UN SDGs, and we will destroy ourselves if we continue in a business as usual, even if with a scenario, or even if we try harder. So we really need to implement a smart way, what they call the smart way. What is that? There are 5 political and action items that we have adopted in terms of investing into the companies that help, that contribute to going back into a safe operating system. Number 1 is significantly increase the investments in renewable energies to ensure halving the carbon emissions in 10 years. Well, actually, it depends, the numbers are different, but we need to go to net zero economic activity on the planet. So through investments in renewable energies across the board. Number two, we need to make sure that we feed the people on this planet, which comes back again to what the archaeologists tell us, providing energy and the food. So we need to make sure that whatever we do to feed people on the planet, that is done in a sustainable way. Number three, we need to make sure that we help developing countries, that the developed countries basically help developing countries develop in a sustainable way and not produce CO2 emissions as China has done, for instance. They've done a wonderful job, but we need to do what they did right, but in a sustainable way. We need to learn from China and South Korea and Japan and others, and provide the support and the money, the funding and the guidance to developing countries. Number four, we need to reduce inequality. We need to make sure that 10% of the population in every country doesn't own more than 40% of the wealth, which is very often the case. And number five, which is my favorite, is girls' education, family planning, support women. Because, of course, that's where the woman comes to the forefront right now. The science tells us that the difference between, in terms of the carbon footprint, the difference between a girl that has 12 years of education, which of course would make her a woman, and one without education is 4.5 children. So that addresses the overpopulation, and of course, healthcare is part of that. That's why we invest in education and healthcare from an early stage perspective. So this is basically addressing the first part of the question that you had. The second question, that was artificial intelligence. There's a lot of confusion as to what in the world is artificial intelligence, and are we currently being manipulated by artificial intelligence systems in the world? And oh my God, our privacy is being violated and all these things. So I think trying to make more sense of what is actually going on would be very helpful. So artificial intelligence it depends how you look at it. We do have Kai-Fu Lee, who is a very well-known Silicon Valley artificial intelligence expert. He has identified 4 major areas that will probably help most people to make sense of, what are the waves in terms of evolution of artificial intelligence. And the first wave where it all started is Internet AI, which is basically what we have today. It's, you go to Netflix, and if you're lucky, Netflix recognizes you in terms of, what you've watched last night, and, make some recommendations for what you could watch today. So then we also have Facebook. Yes, they do all use all kinds of algorithms, and they want to keep you on site so that you spend more money, and the impact is all well known. So that's the Internet AI, Internet-based AI. The next evolution wave in AI is business AI. Of course, Netflix and Facebook are businesses, but another thing that I need to preface is artificial intelligence. And as I said before, I studied artificial intelligence back in the early 80s. But AI went into a dormant phase. Why? Although the technology AI has been actually named as such in 1956 by a Stanford professor, John, I forgot the last name, but it couldn't succeed because the computing power was not there. And as the computing power became, grew exponentially, and it was available, all of a sudden you could see that, AI could also, in terms of modern programming, could also be implemented. Why? Because another component came along, which is extremely important, is the availability of data. AI can only exist with masses of data. So that is extremely important. Now back to business AI, and please stop me if I'm boring you. Is that okay? So business AI is basically the mining of massive amounts of data to, yes, you can influence people on Facebook and do bad things with them. I'm personally, as you can tell, I'm not a fan of Facebook. But the positive thing, which gives us hope and should give us hope, is the application of AI-based technology, which is, some sort of a smart algorithm. It's not really self-thinking and doesn't have anything to do with massive amounts of intelligence. And we're not there yet. But building, for instance, predictive medicine, helping people perform remote diagnosis. Imagine what is the impact of a system that is available. Most people have an iPhone in Africa and all of that. Imagine how you could actually coach somebody with a health problem through a simple iPhone for free in the wildest depth of nature. So that, of course, the premise is to have internet access, but I'm sure that's not an issue as we move along. So that is a beautiful application for making better decisions in business, providing better healthcare to systems, and also helping to develop solutions to diseases like Parkinson's through protein folding and others that don't have remedy as we speak. So I'm personally a huge fan of technology and how that can be applied to help people on the planet. Why? Because if people have the feeling that they are taken care of, for instance, through universal basic income, through technology, through medical care, and so on, they don't need to multiply. They don't need to ensure their future through their children who are starving. Then the third wave is perception AI, which is actually beginning to emerge. In you're paying. The pandemic has actually made it available. You're paying with your face. So that's an application of all these smart systems, and it's not a simple thing to do. Can help us gain a better life and create a better future for us. And then of course the fourth wave is autonomous AI, which is different from automated AI. That we currently have, like self-driving, but systems that actually artificial intelligence systems that make decisions. Currently, right, they independently from a human can make decisions. So that's we currently have self-driving cars right now, and that's coming. But autonomous AI would take that to the next level. Now, in terms of the structure of AI, so I better stop here because we could go into various other areas. So you see, I am a fan. I'm a fan of the application of artificial intelligence. However, having said that, we need to make sure and invite everybody to sign the Asilomar Principles. What is that? The artificial intelligence, and we talked about this before, the artificial AI systems are as good or everything on the outside is a direct reflection of who is on the inside and what we are on the inside. And that's no different in artificial intelligence, right? So I create the world on the outside as I am on the inside, as I think, my level of consciousness manifests on the outside, of course. And that's the same in programmers. And that's why I called for, and that's why I joined the Future of Life Institute that was started by Mark Stegmark and financed by Elon Musk, who is a big believer that we need to save consciousness. on this planet. He doesn't think that we are very successful at it, but otherwise he wouldn't want to fly to Mars. But I am a big supporter. Society Asilomar principles, in order to ensure that those who are programming the artificial intelligence systems get and are tested on ethical means. They get an ethical and moral education. And we see how some artificial intelligence systems have, big ones, Google, they looked at Black people and said that those, were gorillas or something. So you see, that's a direct reflection of the programmer's mindset. So this is something, again, that politicians need to join, and the people, those who are awakened need to join forces in and address those issues, because that's where the problem comes. And of course, as AI evolves to, artificial general intelligence, to really mimic human intelligences, or even go beyond to super intelligence, it becomes even more important that these ethical dimensions are being implemented. And of course, we all need to listen to Snowden and others in order to know that something has to occur. And so that is ethical AI. I would like to add another component, because everyone talks about ethics and AI and ethics in general, but nobody really goes into the details. What does it mean? Oh, we need to implement ethics and morals. What does it mean? Let's take all the churches in the world ever since civilization began existing, have a moral code. The Ten Commandments in the Western, in the European world, Catholics and all these. We do have those 10 commandments, but why aren't we in the world listening to them? Why don't we implement it? Why is it so difficult to do that? So we're not the first to call for ethics and morals. The church has done it, and they haven't succeeded, only partially. All in one, yes, we have evolved, but since everyone is born at square zero, and depending on their economic status, situation, they have the mindset and can focus on moving up the Maslow pyramid. But if they are caught up in survival mode, they can't. They have to go and steal in order to survive. So we need to define what ethics is and morals, and provide the people the ability to really move up, the Maslow pyramid, to use an example in terms of evolutionary inner evolution. So I think it's extremely important that we take these things into consideration, because it's not that you are only now faced with such issues. No, the churches, all religion around the world have been doing this for a long time. But even the Dalai Lama is born at ground zero, and we have to live in a society that supports evolution and moral evolution and ethical evolution. So I hope I addressed most of the issues that you asked me.
Yeah. Mariana, you are a thrilling thinker. And before I ask my question, I do want to remark upon what Mr. Zuckerberg has just come up with, saying that he's going to create the Metasphere, where people buy property, within the inner this meta world, and of course that brings with it all kinds of dreadful possibilities. But my real question is that, given the pathology in leadership today, if you were asked to bring together a core team of people from everywhere to join a special gathering of architects, we really talk about architects a lot in our books, a gathering of world architects whose task it is to start designing new covenants, new constitutions, business models, technologies for catalyzing many of the things that you've been talking about, catalyzing the necessary changes in the ways we become human, we become the possible human. ways we grow, develop, evolve our human societies, what would be the first tasks or processes that you would focus on and your key criteria for bringing this team together?
Another simple question.
Good question.
Interestingly enough, we're thinking along the same lines, because as I referred to before, all these silos that we're currently facing prevent
Yes.
the unification of those thinkers. So those of us who are less narcissistic, should I say? I think that's one of the biggest. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest impediments of joining forces, because the technology has also created the environment for creating narcissists, whether they're a covert or open. But to come back to you, assuming that we can see those and each other, and can overcome the traps of our own narcissism, we're thinking along the same lines. Who are the people? There is an organization that studied the inner development goals, which I think that's exactly what needs to be added to the sustainable development goals. And so I don't know that I have one thing or the solution, because I don't, but I do have some ideas and the direction that we're trying to move towards. I think that honoring the truth in all there is, which is the motto of Ken Wilber's integral theory, honoring the truth in all there is, across all evolutionary scales, all peoples, all intelligences, cognitively or not, I think is extremely important, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see occurring is that people use their minds only the cognitive intelligence, and try to make sense of the world, whereas most of what makes us is not seen, cannot be, it's not cognitively explainable. It's we do have science, but if you really look into the world and look what science has been able to achieve, we can only make sense of, at the most, 5% of the universe. Everything, 95% is not explainable. So we need to leave room for the unknown. And in order for us to come up with new solutions, we need to bring those who are open enough in their heart and represent various types of intelligences, not just cognitive and science, but also arts, morals, psychology, psychospirituality, emotional intelligence. I think we need to bring all these people around the table, and a willingness to listen to one another, go into a process of emergence, of listening to one another, and where we allow the wisdom, the collective wisdom of people who understand, accept, and love each other, learn to love each other, to emerge new wisdom. I don't think that any one of these groups, stakeholders, whatever they want to call themselves, have the answers. Because the problems that we're having are way too big right now. But I do believe, I'm actually not I believe, I know that we do have the solution. I know we will survive. And not only survive, I know we will thrive. I have this, I grew up as an atheist in communist Romania, of course. And I believed in it. But I had to reinvent God, not God in church, but God, spirituality for myself. So that's how I began meditating and so on, because I had to. And in a similar way, I hope that by building such gatherings like the ones that you're having right now, and it opens my heart. I cannot tell you enough. I tell you this with tear in my eyes, how grateful I am that groups like the ones that we're working on exist outside of my own gravitational center. And so I have the conviction that that transformation is possible. I'm not saying that it will be easy, but I think so. Transcend and include. Use the wisdom of what, we're standing on the shoulders of people who have come before us. Transcend and include their wisdom. Build diverse groups of people across all possible intelligences and representatives. But however, I think one important aspect is we need to timely limit this process. We cannot talk endlessly without results. We need resolutions. And we need to force ourselves in terms of force ourselves to spit it out, to say, what is it? Because, we can only know the next step. We will not know what's going to happen in 100 years. Evolution takes place, but we need to allow evolution to take place, consciousness to occur through us. And so we only need the next step. So I don't know that I answered your question, dear friend, but this is what I would like to do, because solutions are there, but we need to bring them together and allow each other to be informed, to learn from one another, and not pretend that we already know, because that's arrogance, that's not true, and allow room for the unknown to emerge. Thank you.
Many would think that we are in closing times, and yet you have a freshness of vision that suggests that we are on the eve of opening times. Why is this going to happen?
Is that a statement or a question? Why that is going to happen?
Why is this going to happen? Because you seem to believe this, and that's wonderful. You know it, and you bring together such a rich panoply of possibilities. You have existential knowledge of so many things going on in the world, both for good or ill, but you have moved in your life story and in your thinking to the sense of that we are past apocalypse into a time of radically new creation and possibility, the possible human and the possible world.
That's an impossible question.
Yes, of course it is. It's the only kind that's worth asking.
Yeah. Because my life was full of miracles.
Yes.
That's why. And I am a scientist who meditates, and I know that the next miracle is coming. I don't know where, but I know. When Carl Jung was asked whether he believes in God or not, he said, I don't have to believe, I know. And I have to come up with the same answer. And I'm not talking about God. I'm talking about my greatest belief in life is I'm taken care of. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And as long as I'm still here, I'm taken care of. We are taken care of. And evolution can only occur through us. How else? One of a friend who came to my house in Portola Valley, in Silicon Valley, is Neil Donald Walsh, and he was an amazing teacher. And
he's my neighbor, by the way.
Oh my God! Yeah, I'm sure he remembers because he's been in my house. Give him my love, please, because I learned a lot. I mean, the dual is created because through us, evolution takes place, consciousness evolves, and that's why we're here. And if we're not meant to go to the next step, we wouldn't exist. So the fact that we exist shows me that there is the next step, the next evolutionary step in consciousness. Whether that will go in regression for a time or not, but evolution takes place and will continue. And I know that. Don't ask me how I know. I know it in my heart.
And that's why Anneloes asks the question that relates to this. Anneloes.
Actually, I'm out of questions. I'm actually out of. I just want to say that that's why for me, and I know Regine too, you embody what it means to be a future human. Because everything that you've just said, that to me is the spirit of what it means to be a future human. Because that's living the future now. The future is that continuation of consciousness of life itself. And it's that future that reaches into us, exactly as you just said. I find it so powerful and so profound, and I also experienced this so much in your thinking, in your ideas, but also most of all your care, your love, your commitment, the whole journey that you've been through in your life, what you've done with your life, what you've shown, what is possible by taking on those challenges and becoming wiser through it and more innovative and more creative. So thank you for exemplifying what it means to be a future human and giving us hope of this possible world that's already alive in our hearts right here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just mirroring you, my dear friends. Many blessings to you all.
Many blessings.